Hey everyone, it's 10 Types, and today I have a Silver Tempest top 10 list slash power rankings. I'm not actually sure what I'm going to call the video yet, but you get the idea. I'm going to go over the top 10 decks in the metagame right now, and you may be thinking, what makes this different than anyone else's list? And it is done right. That's right. Yep, I'm just going to... It's pretty much the same as everyone else's list, except the meta is really interesting right now, and I think I have some takes that some people might not agree with. Especially, I actually think you won't. The number one deck's probably gonna surprise you. I think it will. But anyways, let's hop into it. So number 10 here we have Zoroark. This is I was considering not putting this on the list, but honestly, it's a very good deck, and it's in a pretty solid spot in the meta. Also, for each deck, I'm gonna have 4 different lists, so we can see 4 different Zoroark lists here. We see the one in the top left plays. It plays Chinchino Engine, and the bottom left also plays Chinchino Engine, but you see Gardevoir Engine and Barrel Engine also come into play. We see most of the list, well, all the lists are playing lots of Twin Energy, but there's still some Hisuian Arcanine, but generally most lists are leaning away from that. We see the Radiant Jirachi Glimmer Tangle combo thrown in some lists, as well as Cleavor, and sometimes even Toxicity to Mill. We see the one on the lower right has Gallade and Toxicity, Bayonet, all these ways to kind of mess with your opponent and disrupt them. One of the most powerful techs right now, though, is Appleton, being able to counter Luigia really well, as well as that Raichu, which counters both Luigia and Palkia. So we see all these different counters. We also see the Hisuian Zoroark, an interesting new inclusion that actually isn't from the newest set, but it's still very strong. We see the Serena Breaks in combo just being super strong as well. And if you want any of the lists, and you can't see them clearly here, this is just the Limitless list, but they're a bit blurry. Comment down below, I can give you the list. But you see some lists, the one list plays Path, the one plays Jubilee Village, so you can really go a ton of different ways with it. Also, the Slowbro from Pokemon Go, really good, being able to just take 2 prizes at the end of the game. Midina, also a great counter to Mew, so you have counters to all the best decks, and Zoroark's in a really good spot. It's still only number 10, though. It's a bit inconsistent and slow, so it's solid, but it can struggle against some of the other decks a little bit. Number 9, though, we have Regis, another single prize deck that focuses around Regigigas, and that you just accelerate energy. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this deck. Oh, I guess I didn't explain what Zoroark does, so I'll go back to that. It turns into different stage 1, so stage 1 box. But Regis, oops, sorry, you saw the next deck, but you see Regis here coming in at number 9, and they're a very strong deck. Pretty basic. They got Gift Energy back, which was recently unbanned, so that's cool. Generally not playing Thornton, the bottom right list does, but it plays Serena, which is good, but not too much to say there. And we see Yellhorn as well as a counter to Ice Cube, but it's not a great counter, so most lists don't play it. But Regis is still a very good deck, but not the best either, kind of vulnerable. But yeah, as you saw there, it's Arceus is number 8, only number 8. It's a very dynamic deck, but it's not seeing a lot of play, and people are just preferring to play stuff like, for example, Luigia over it, which is almost like Arceus's power level, but it's stronger. It's less consistent, but Arceus is still the king of consistency. We see 4 different Arceus lists, and there are honestly a few more I was considering. But the main one is Arceus Duraludon as a counter to Luigia and as well Mew. Now, I think people are counting Luigia a bit too much right now, but Arceus Duraludon is certainly a very solid counter to Luigia. And we also, it's not like an unbeatable, or it's not like it beats it all the time, but Arceus Duraludon with its ability to wall off special energy and hit really hard consistently, it's just one of the stronger decks in the game right now, although it's a bit inconsistent, to say the least. However, we see Regidrago here with Arceus, and this is probably the best way to play Regidrago. I was considering putting that on the list, but really, if you're playing it, you either play it with Luigia or with Arceus, so it didn't really get its own spot. And so we got Regidrago here coming in with Arceus, very solid, being able to wall with Gudra, hit with Giratina, and just a very solid attacker to be able to be defensive and attack. And so you're pretty versatile there. And so that's certainly a solid attacker. But is it the best way to play Arceus? I'm not sure, but it's certainly very strong. So we see that coming in. And then we also see Flying Pikachu, still a very good deck. Being able to hit weakness on Luigia and Palkia is really nice. We also see the Espeon VMAX. Not all lists play this, but I think it's really good to play Espeon because that stops the Yveltal Amazing Rare as well as a few other things, and it's just insane because now you're just much safer as a whole. And you can also attack with it in this list in particular. But pretty much you have Arceus Flying Pikachu to counter basic Pokemon and Lightning Weak Pokemon. We see that the Drapion V as well. Some lists play Crobat VMAX still, but that feels really bad when you can just play Drapion, which is such a good counter to Mew. We also just see the Bibarel line. But Arceus can be played in a bunch of different engines. We just have the classic Arceus Inteleon as well. Still very solid, and now you have a ton of defensive options. You have V-Guard Energy from the new set, like Acuity from, I think, the last set, as well as Radiant Gardevoir. And now you're super tanky. You can still play that path, and you see this diversity in trainers, the new Serena. We see Avery, Roxanne, Boss, Shannon Karamarni, Melanie. So you have all these different like supporter options, and the deck's really solid and consistent as well. It also doesn't have a target on its back anymore, so you can maybe even cut Dunsparce, although I'm not sure if I'd recommend it. There are certainly some lists still playing some fighting Pokemon. But overall, Arceus is super good right now, but it comes up a bit short against some of the top decks, as you'll see. But overall, if you want to play Arceus. It's certainly worth your while. And you can test out different builds as well. Comment down below what your favorite build of Arceus is, honestly. I'd have to go with the Regidrago build, but it's just so fun overall. Now we see Flaaffy here. And this is, like, I imagine some of you are like, what are you on? Flaaffy higher than Arceus? Now, Flaaffy's cracked. Look at these lists. I recently finished well in like a tournament, but it's doing pretty decent. It's not finishing amazingly well, but it's such a strong deck right now because its ability to hit weakness on Luigia and Palkia, which is really good, especially with so much of those decks floating around. A bit of a countermatic haul, but we see the list in the top left. I mean, all of them obviously play Flaaffy, which accelerates energy. And then you want to focus on probably Zekrom as your main attacker to paralyze and do solid damage. We also see Regieleki for bench damage. You could even play Regieleki V for tankiness. We see Zapdos to increase damage as well, which is nice, as well as the sniping Zapdos. Snorlax as well is a really solid Pokemon in this meta with Unfazed Fat. Its ability to just like tank hits and do solid damage. And we also see Raikou V, just a solid Pokemon. You see Vikavolt as well. We'll actually get to Vikavolt a bit later, although Vikavolt didn't make its own deck here. Because Vikavolt is just a bit underwhelming right now. However, Vikavolt teched in these Flaaffy boxes is super interesting and strong. We also see Metacham, kind of a cool tech to be able to like pick away at these single prizes. But overall, nothing too crazy. Tabu Kogo as well as a solid attacker. You could put Zygarde to hit fighting weakness, right? We see decks trying to hit that fighting weakness from time to time. So you can just go a bunch of different routes, as well as Miltank popping up in a few lists here. The big issue is the engine. Obviously, Radiant Greninja, super important, but then one list thrown in Cinccino. You probably want Crobat, maybe the Snorlax, but it's a bit inconsistent. You just need to play a lot of supporters. So that's one of the big reasons why it's not like hitting the top 5, but its power level is super high, especially with Raichu V, I guess I didn't touch on too much. But being able to hit almost infinite damage against like decks that you don't hit for weakness is just so nice, and you can one-shot anything. So mess around with Flaaffy. It's in a very solid spot right now, and you can just win lots of games. Now we're going to move to number 6, and this is, I think, where decks start to jump up quite a bit. We see Water Box, which is kind of a weird deck that's hard to classify, but I'm going to go into talk about it. So a lot of these lists play Flaaffy, but not all of them do. Sorry, not Flaaffy, Frostmoth. Similar Pokemon, Frostmoth being able to hit the bench and accelerate water energy to the bench, which is just amazing. And then you can just accelerate as much as you want. So you see tons of water energy, so you can get these big attackers. Notably that Articuno, which I'll go back to, that says it does 70 for 2, so a bit awkward to power up sometimes, but not too bad. And then does 50 to itself, which is really unfortunate, meaning you can't attack with it 3 times, but then your opponent's active is paralyzed. So you can hit these really solid damage outputs, and we see a few interesting builds here. The one in the bottom right is probably the sketchiest because it has like this Lunala line thrown in all these toolbox cards, but still very solid with the Articuno focus. And then we see the one, and it doesn't play Frostmoth either. I keep confusing Flaaffy and Frostmoth, the 2 F Pokemon. Great energy accelerators, but Frostmoth being the better one here. because you can just accelerate to the Articuno. You can also accelerate to Radiant Greninja. We see the Inteleons, and we see the Alolan Vulpix V-Star line very solid as well as Ice Cube being able to counter these specific decks, and the Drapions just being able to counter exactly what you want to. It's really amazing. Also, Nessa, amazing in that deck. Irida, just one of the best supporters in the game right now as well. Being able to use these powerful cards just super consistently is just amazing. We also see the Radiant Alakazam actually coming in the one list, which feels a bit sketchy because you can't go for these early pushes with Radiant Greninja, but it's certainly solid in the fact that you can move damage around once you get this pseudo-lock type of thing going on with Articuno. You can ping and just spread damage around, which is pretty cool. We also see Emergency Jelly actually making its way into most of these lists here because it can heal off your Articuno, and that says pretty much once you've attacked twice with Articuno, you just attach this and it gets healed off. So that's really solid. Keep in mind, you can't also Choice Belt. That's why none of the lists here play Choice Belt, except for the bottom right, which doesn't play Emergency Jelly. But overall, we see just really solid lists that are super consistent because Inteleon Engine and Iridas, and also able to paralyze, and auto paralysis is insane. Also, Crabominable V, I guess I should mention, very strong water Pokemon that if you want to mess around and do big damage, just play that as well. And you see just Water Box being so good right now, and it's really cool. But now moving into number 5, we have Palkia here. Palkia V-Star, a classic Pokemon, and a lot of people were thinking it wasn't that good, but it's really interesting right now. So in the top right, we see, or I guess I'll start with the bottom right, which is a standard list with just Inteleons and stuff. Nothing too crazy going on there. But top right, we see the Articuno thrown in, as well as that Emergency Jelly, to be able to just run through your opponent's attackers by paralyzing them and getting them locked up, because a lot of lists don't play Switch right now. So locking them up with paralysis is super strong. We also see that Drapion and that Radiant Greninja as always. But then we see in the bottom left list here, it's the Kyurem VMAX list that I'm sure many of you are used to from last meta, where you have the Kyurem VMAX Oranguru package to accelerate a bunch of water energy, hit essentially infinite damage with that Kyurem, and we also see Wash Water Energy make its way into some of the Palkia lists because it's important to be able to beat your Voltals and stuff. Keep in mind, you probably want to play Manaphy as well, although this one list in the top left, which I believe won a pretty decent-sized tournament, didn't play Manaphy, so you can, if you're not filling your board with tons of Palkias, it's okay to not, you have the lightning counter. So this top left list here plays lightning counters, which are just really used to beat the Luigia matchup as well as the Palkia mirror. And it's really strong, the Vikavolt being able to item lock as well, and this is really the spirit of the Vikavolt deck that we've seen in the past. Being able just to hit this solid damage output turn 1 and item lock, it's just insane. I say solid damage output, it only hits 50, but certainly better than nothing. And the deck's pretty consistent with those 4 Melanies, Iridas, Trekking Shoes, Quick Ball, Lumineon Crobat, all these crazy combo cards, so you can get this big Melanie turn 1, attach Lightning. But the deck's a bit inconsistent on turn 1 attacking. But aside from that, it's absurdly strong if you get off that item lock turn 1. And Palkia is just a great attacker to lean back on. Although we don't see Force Seal Stone, which makes its way into a lot of decks that are focused on just the Vikavolt, sometimes with Regieleki VMAX, but Vikavolt Palkia is better anyway, so you probably want to play it like this. Then we see Lost Zone coming at number 4. Lost Zone's a weird deck right now, but here are 4 lists, and these are 4 really interesting and unique lists. They all focus around Comfy with its ability to put cards in the Lost Zone, as well as Colvis' Experiment, so you get lots of cards in the Lost Zone, and then you react and do something with that. Oftentimes you use Mirage Gate, which is one of the best cards in the game, ever, honestly, because it just accelerates so much energy. And you see the top left list. This is I guess I'd say a standard list. You see Sableye to spread, which appears in all the lists, which doesn't need lots of energy. Cramorant, which attacks for free, also obviously very cheap, seen in all the lists. But then we see the Radiant Greninja with its spread attack, the Kyogre Amazing Rare with its spread attack, Zekrom with its ability to hit Lightning Weakness, which is really good, as well as its Paralysis, and then Snorlax with its ability just to hit big damage and kind of tank some. And these 4 are really only able to be powered up with Mirage Gate. And then in the top right list here, we see that Raikou instead of Zekrom, but pretty much the same idea. And then we see the Rayquaza Amazing Rare. there, which is insane, being able to hit big damage. So that some lists going for spreads, some lists going for one-shots. Rayquaza, if you get 4 energy, you're one-shotting anything. If you get 3, you're one-shotting most things anyway. So just being able to do this massive damage with Mirage Gate is really insane. Keep in mind, though, that you need lots of energy recovery. We see multiple Raws and energy recyclers in every list. So, I mean, not energy recyclers in every list, but Raws in every. We don't see rods in the bottom left list, I guess, but we see Clara's, rods, energy recyclers across the board, especially with the Mirage Gate lists, so you can pair up these big attackers. And then we also see a really diverse stadium count. Some play No Stadium, some play Templacino, some play Magma Basin for the Radiant Charizard, and then some play Pokestop. So that's really cool, and you see the diversity in these lists. We see the lower left one is the old school, I guess, build, which isn't actually that old. It's more modern than the old builds, but whatever. You get the idea that it's pretty much just doesn't use Mirage Gate. That's the whole thing. You have Clara, you have Raihan, you have Roxanne, be able to control the game and play it safe in the mid to late game. Disrupt your opponent and hit these consistent Radiant Charizards near the end of the game. Some of the lists used to play Path, but now it looks like they're not, because Path and Radiant Charizard don't work together, so people have cut that. But you see cross switches, choice spells to be able to hit this solid, consistent, big damage, and hopefully attack turn 1 as well. And then in the lower right list, we see Giratina V-Star list, which is debatably not Lost Box, but it is really. You see the Cramorant, Sableye, as well as Radiant Greninja with Mirage Gate, and Giratina V-Star being one of the most dangerous attackers in the whole game, being able to pretty much one-shot anything, and also able to tank hits, so it's really good. Although people are playing big Parasol, which stops Giratina and Sableye, they're big attacks, so you kind of want to be wary of that, but overall it's just really solid, and Lost Box, you can kind of change it in any way you want, and overall it's one of the best decks in the game right now, certainly. And I think, like, if you're thinking Lost Box isn't good enough because of, like, other decks, like, for example, Luigia, Lost Box is still amazing. It pales, like, some people are like, oh yeah, no, Regis are better, but no, Lost Box is better. It has so many more options. It's super strong, and I'd highly recommend you play it if you want to play something fun, something aggressive, if you just want to play Pokemon, play Lost Box, honestly. Number 3 here, we get into some of the big boys. We see Mew VMAX with its ability to draw cards. We see a bunch of different lists. We actually ended up putting my list here because Mew VMAX, quite frankly, doesn't have 4 different lists. But we have the Beedrill list I threw together, which you can try out. I actually made a video, so check that out on the Beedrill list, being able to counter stuff. But we see other counters. One in the list that I don't have here plays Drapion. I personally wouldn't recommend that. But you can kind of put some counters in Mew Genesect. But really, you want to focus on the big draw. And there are 3 different builds here. We see on the top left, which is the Fusion Strike energy build, and the bottom left also does that. And you see that the one in the bottom left has tanking aspects, V-Guard energy, Crystal Cave. And honestly, it's not too different. And then the top right has the just double turbo build, but pretty much there's the Fusion build, the double turbo build, and you want to probably start putting in Path into your decks as well. You can play the Beedrill build, which is my build, which is pretty cool, being able to counter Luigia, but really the Fusion Strike build is pretty solid, and the double turbo build is also good. But pretty much play what you want. You can stick in tanky stuff, you can stick in control-y stuff, but just make sure you have make sure you have the power and consistency, and also Forest Steel Stone. If you're not playing Forest Steel Stone, that's bad. Make sure you play it. It's really good, although it may or may not be bugged. But it's super good, and I'd highly recommend you try out Mew VMAX with Forest Steel Stone if you just want a big powerhouse and you have that stuff available. But moving into number 2, it's number 2 is Luigia. I know some of you are thinking number 1 has to be Luigia. It's not. Luigia is good, but is it the best? No. Luigia gets Arceus into play, gets a ton of special energy. It's really good right now. There's not too much to say about this that you probably haven't heard, but pretty much you see the Espeon VMAX appearing, as well as a counter to your Voltal, which appears in a lot of these lists, being able to one-shot anything. Radiant Charizard able to hit big damage as the Radiant of choice. We also see high counts of Arceus, lower counts of Luigia, relying on non-Luigia attackers most of the time. We see Snorlax, Regigigas, Stoutland as well, being able to take extra prizes is pretty cool. Nothing too crazy, honestly, going on with most of these lists here. The special energy counts are certainly differing from list to list, but you will definitely want that V-Guard energy You might want Gift Energy. You definitely want the Powerful Energy and the Aurora Energy. And then just go from there, see how you want to build it. Double Turbo is really good. Twin's also pretty good. And you see the list just making... honestly, a lot of these are kind of... They seem kind of thin on supporters, but they're really solid. But they only have like 7 supporters, or 8 supporters that draw cards. So a bit sketchy there, but super solid. The only issue is you need to make sure you're playing Pumpkaboo. All these lists here play Pumpkaboo. You probably want Lost Vacuum. Most of these lists play... Lost Vacuum. And you probably don't want Path, honestly. You probably want to go Aurora Energy, hardcore, really fast. And this is like the big explosive deck in the meta right now. And it's really strong because it's just able to pop off like turn 2 and KO anything in the active, or also hit the bench. And it can really KO anything any turn, and it's just so scary. Or take extra prizes as well. So this deck's super strong. Not the best deck, but very close, very close. And you can also experiment. You can experiment with Reggie Draco thrown in it. You can experiment with something like Urshifu thrown in there, or something Gengar thrown in, Umbreon. There are all these different options, and they're all really strong. So mess around with Luigia if you have Luigia until you find a deck that like fits your liking. And Luigia is certainly very solid, and it's something I'd recommend for most people if you want this like explosive type deck. But then we move into the number 1 deck, which is actually Control, which I'm sure some people are going to be like, oh, that's not one deck. But I don't know. I'm calling it one deck. We see, actually, I have Durant as well. This is a quote-unquote Control deck, but it's with the Yveltal. So it's either Yveltal or Mewtwo V Union. The Mewtwo V Union pretty much heals. It also has a spread attack and a big damage attack. So there's a lot to unpack here. And honestly, I imagine many of you are not Control players. I've played a solid amount of Control, and I know how it works. But first of all, top left, a very basic list. You have lots of Yveltals, so you can beat Luigia and maybe Mew as well. And then you also have the Mewtwo V Union, so if you're against something like Arceus, Lost Box is something that can't one-shot you. You can heal off like every turn with your attack. Let's see, the top right attack here, Super Regeneration Heal, 200 damage from this Pokemon. And you also use its own attack to accelerate to itself. We see Radiant Gardevoir reducing damage. We see Yellowhorn, Galarmine, Hammers, Misfortune Sisters, these disruption cards, Yelchier, Silene, and Palpat, as well as Peonia, making sure that you can get into this infinite loop near the end as well while your opponent times out. We also have a Miltank just to wall in case your opponent's not able to hit through that, which could be good. Pokemon Center Lady as well to make sure you can heal enough every turn. But and V-Guard Energy as well. V-Guard Energy, very solid right now. But you see the very basic build of Mewtwo V Union and the Yveltal just being able to discard energy against Luigia and wall against other stuff. But that's not like necessarily the only way to play this, certainly. We have, I guess I'll touch on Durant. We just get a bunch of Durants in play, mill your opponent's deck. We also see that Yveltal to discard the energy. And then nothing too crazy with the Durant list, though. But then we see the other Mewtwo V Union control list here, which is actually really cool. I've been experimenting with some. And this is, I want to say it's a more aggressive list, but you see some really interesting things. First of all, we see that Curlier line, so you can discard through your deck with that. Keep in mind that it's actually Psychic, which is surprisingly important. And we don't see Radiant Gardevoir, unlike in the other list. I mean, we see Radiant Gardevoir, Radiant Venusaur, very solid cards. But we see Radiant Serena, which heals. And for control, you want to be able to reduce the damage so you don't get one-shot with Mewtwo V Union. But this list is actually really interesting. Using that Gengar from Sword and Shield, you can move damage counters, I believe, from your Psychic Pokemon to your other Psychic Pokemon. So obviously they hit into your Mewtwo V Union, and presumably they don't KO it. If they KO it, that's bad, and you probably lose. But if they don't KO it, then you have V-Guard Energy to reduce the chance of them KOing it. And then now you can move your damage, spread it around, put 20 on each of your Psychic Pokemon. Radiant Serena heals 20 from all your Pokemon. Now you heal all this damage off. And now you don't really need to Super Regeneration. You can move all that damage off. You'll still have some in play. You can move it off and then hopefully heal it off next turn. And in the meantime, you can go in with those big attacks, which I'll scroll back to here. Final Burn 300. Sorry, it's really hard to see. But you get Final Burn to just one-shot stuff. Side Explosion just to mess up your opponent's board. And you can completely obliterate their board. And they can't really do too much about it. They can go after Gengar, but that feels kind of bad because now they're not hitting into this Mewtwo, which is causing all the problems. They can carry Radiant Serena, which also feels kind of bad. You can also use the Gardevoir engine to accelerate, although that's not amazing. You also have Shadow out of Calyrex V, able to stop your opponent from playing Stadiums, which isn't a big deal. But it also stops them from playing Special Energy, which can be really important in, for example, the Mew matchup. And that could theoretically win that matchup for you. Although this list isn't necessarily infinite, because we don't see that Team Yell's cheer. And then the top right list here, which is honestly the most interesting. I played it, and it's really hard to pilot. But we see that Ice Cube, which you actually need to manually attach to across a few turns. But that Ice Cube you can go ahead and set up and wall off those basic decks. You also see those high counts of your Voltal. It's the main win condition. If you're against Luigia, you just run them out of all those energies, and you hopefully win the game that way. You see the Galar Mines played in this list as well. And so you can gust them up with Boss's Orders or... does this play Serena? It does not play Serena. You can gust, yeah, it doesn't. You can gust them up with Boss Orders, though. You can also discard the energy with Flannery or Sydney or Crushing Hammers as well, and you can go after them that way. As I said, you can wall with Miltank. You can also use Greedent V, which discards any energy. Just one, though, so certainly it can be good against... I don't actually remember what that's in there for. I think it's in there for... Like if they're playing like basic energy, I'm sure it's good against Vikavolt or something. But it's kind of weird, but it's certainly solid. Then we also see that Radiant Gardevoir to reduce damage. And you also have Pidgeot V. And Pidgeot V is really interesting here because you can go ahead and send that into the active, and now you can either Chance Carrot back, which is okay, but not great, and also cape it up so it survives, or you can get it back onto the bench by like retreating or whatever. And now all of a sudden you're in a really good spot because you can go ahead and use this ability which shuffles it back to the deck. So you can do Birdkeeper, Eldegoss loops like that if you want, and these like silly loop decks, which are kind of fun. And then you can go ahead and do that. You can also, as I said, Sharon's Care. You can also go ahead and do Yellhorns to confuse and mess them up that way. We see only one Wash Water, which seems kind of questionable, meaning if you want to attack with Ice Cube, it's really hard to do so. But still really solid. Lost Vacuums to like disrupt even more. And that Force Seal Stone being put in the list to give it more consistency with the Eldegoss or Greedent. But overall, what are your thoughts on the meta right now? I think Control's certainly the dominant force, it looks like. And there's some really interesting decks, but comment down below what you think of them. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. Also, do you agree with this? I'm sure people are going to shred me, say Luigia's the best, but I don't think Luigia's the best deck. Luigia's good. Luigia's very good, but it's not the best deck. Like, I'm going to go, like, people aren't innovating Luigia here. These are the Luigia list. They're like, nah, we're all good with our list, but no, please, if you want to play Luigia, get something a little bit better than this. And I'm sure Luigia can do a little bit more than this. This isn't bad, but it's not perfect either. So Luigia needs to push itself a little more. Control can also push itself a bit more. And then we see other lists like that Zoroark list, and Arceus, all these interesting toolboxy lists, as well as those Frostmoth and Flaaffy decks with the Paralysis just being so strong. So I'm really interested to see what's going to happen with the meta. But comment down below, as I said, what you think of it. And if you enjoy this, I really appreciate if you'd like and subscribe. And as always, I'm just excited to see all of you in the next video.